Welcome to a new episode of the NEXUS podcast series. NEXUS is an EU-funded project that strives to make inclusivity a reality in the world of research and innovation. In this new episode of the NEXUS series, we explore the role of inclusive EDI leadership in institutional change processes in higher education. For this, we are honored to have Professor Yvonne Galligan with us today. Yvonne is Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion and Professor of Comparative Politics at Technological University Dublin. She is also Chair of the Royal Irish Academy's Ethics, Politics, Law and Philosophical Studies Committee. Before coming to TU Dublin, Yvonne was in Queen's University Belfast. She has led 3 successful institutional Athena Swan Silver applications and has advised many institutions in Ireland, the UK, and North America under Athena Swan or equivalent applications. In recognition of her commitment to advancing gender equality in public life and in the academy, Yvonne received an OBE, an honorary fellowship of Trinity College Dublin, and an honorary doctorate from the University of Edinburgh. She is also an elected fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. Today, Yvonne will be interviewed by Shauna Lawlor, Head of Employee Engagement Team at TU Dublin. Following the completion of her MBS in Management and Organisation Studies, Shauna embarked on a career in the energy industry. However, her deep-seated passion for organizational behavior, culture, inclusion, and diversity, as well as health and well-being, led her to transition into the realm of employee engagement. Thank you very much, Yvonne and Shauna, for joining us today. And over to you, Shauna.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. Yvonne, just to guide our discussion, I have some questions that I'll go through relating to leadership for equality, diversity and inclusion in higher education and research organisations. So, as we know, leadership plays a pivotal role in advancing equity, diversity and inclusion within higher education institutions and research organisations. But how can leaders effectively drive institutional change towards inclusiveness? And what strategies do you think are most impactful in creating sustainable EDI practices?
Good morning, Shauna. Lovely to be with you today. And thank you, Sarah, for your lovely introduction. I think the question you asked about how leaders can effectively drive inclusive institutional change is really a key one for the times that we are in. And it's also a distinctive challenge for leaders who largely, up until now, haven't really had to confront addressing the diversity of their organisations and the people in their organisations. And I think that the very first step that any leader in this area must take is to listen. Leaders are often very good at telling people what's to happen, at setting out a strategic vision for an institution, and at overseeing and directing a change in multiple areas. So they are by nature their own change agents. And sometimes one of the things that leaders find a little bit challenging is actually stopping and drawing back and listening instead of having the solution and instead of being accustomed to directing everything. So in the equality, diversity and inclusion space, I primarily put a priority on listening. And I do that because the needs of everybody in the organisation, be it a university, which we are in, or in any other organisation, are different according to the people that are in that institution, because institutions are made of people. And these institutions may be comprised of 4 walls or many walls, many tables, many chairs, but it's the people that give these institutions life. And so people come with their diverse needs and their diverse perspectives. And leaders, I believe, have to listen to those diverse needs and perspectives and find a way of incorporating those ambitions that have been conveyed into the overall strategic plan and into the overall direction of a university or indeed any other organisation.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that aspect of employee listening, I suppose, because for me in employee engagement, that's a huge aspect of the role. So I love that lens of just taking that pause, as you put it, to really, really focus on listening. Um, there are many different styles of leadership, all of which may be used by an effective leader at one time or another, depending on the particular situation. But in your experience, what are the qualities needed to be an effective leader for EDI? And can you maybe talk to me a bit about those qualities? You know, we've heard about listening, but maybe there are some other qualities in this area that you think are important.
I think a leader has to show real passion and commitment for this particular topic, because the tone the leader sets very much drives the culture of that organisation. And so if the leader is demonstrating a genuine commitment and a genuine passion for equality, for inclusion, and for recognising the diversity of needs and interests of staff and students, then it's possible for institutional change to happen, because this individual can then naturally incorporate that perspective into their leadership work. And I think there's another important characteristic that leaders have to have if they're committed to this area, and that is resilience. Because the equality agenda is not a one fixed agenda. It pervades everything and every aspect that an institution has, and it needs a leader that is prepared to go at it time and time again from many different angles and in many different ways, and to meet resistances and manage resistances while still moving forward.
Absolutely. And I suppose, you know, the needs of staff and students evolve, and I suppose that resilience will be really key then in meeting those challenges where they are. And I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible leaders, and I consider myself very lucky to be working with you now. And in a previous role, the managing director was a truly inspirational leader for EDI. And for me, the secret ingredient was around authenticity. So, you know, there was no tokenism, just a deep-seated authenticity. Could you talk to me a little bit about the importance of that in driving sustainable change?
I think authenticity, Shauna, is really a characteristic that people pick up on very quickly in their leaders. They know when their leaders are sincere and when they're just saying the words just because the words have to be said. And I remember, if I may give a little anecdote, I was in a university once at a meeting with the rector of this university. I'll not say where it was, but it wasn't too long ago, about 6 or 7 years ago. And I was there with another woman and a man. And so the three of us were there, and we were there to talk to the rector about how he could stimulate and support equality in his university and how he could bring that change about. And we walked into the meeting room. The rector was there, greeted us very pleasantly, and invited us to sit down. And the first thing he said when he sat down is he turned to the man and he said, "And what are you doing here? Why are you bothering with this issue?" And of course, our whole reason being there was to talk to him about what he could do to push and develop this issue in his university. My male colleague gave what I thought was a very good reply, which was, "Well, it makes for a better university, makes for better science, it makes for a more rounded decision-making process." So he answered along those lines. But I could see that this individual rector was not really convinced about it. I followed that university afterwards, and I could see from that how difficult it was for the people who were trying to create change to actually get any traction at all. And so they were really confined at what they could do and in the reach of their work. 6 or 7 years on, there's a whole different attitude in that university now. But it just goes to show that change is driven from the top.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's just not something that you can fake. As you say, people can really get a sense of that authenticity and can sound out whether it's there or not. But thank you for sharing that. What an interesting anecdote. What do you think are the key approaches in building leadership capacity for advancing EDI in organisations? And how do you think that we can ensure that leaders are equipped to foster inclusive cultures effectively?
Well, as I said at the outset, Shauna, listening is very important. And it's not just important for itself, but it's important because of the learning that the leader absorbs and takes away from it. If a leader is serious about these things, she or he really does begin to understand the layers and the nuances that accompany situations of inequality, of privilege, discrimination, the use of power, and those kinds of issues and areas. But it's not sufficient for a leader to keep that to themselves. That leader has to be prepared to enable the whole organisation to be educated in understanding the dynamics around power and privilege and how these manifest themselves in the university among students, among staff, between students and staff, between employees together, and in all dimensions. And again, that is a process. And a leader can create the possibilities of this happening through creating strong structures that support equality, diversity, and inclusion, and providing the resources that are required to develop programs. Some of them can be training programs, but also educational programs that really bring people to an understanding of the deep dynamics that underlie inequalities and exclusions in the organisation and indeed in our society at large. And that's a big agenda.
Absolutely, huge agenda. Thank you for that. In their day-to-day work, EDI leaders face many types of cultural and structural obstacles, as well as implicit and explicit resistance to institutional change. We've heard a little bit about resilience, but could you maybe give us an example of what you've witnessed and what advice you'd give to these leaders?
In my time as a person who has been perhaps a change agent in this area, I think I have both seen and encountered multiple forms of resistances. Some are very overt, such as the anecdote that I just mentioned, and some of them are much more subtle. And I think that these resistances, such as ignoring the issue, such as bureaucratic inertia, which is a favourite in organisations, or over-defensiveness and over-justifying the status quo, or challenging the basis for having an equality, diversity and inclusion strategy and agenda. All of these resistances can be met and yet can come from any part of the university. So a leader has to be prepared to have resistances from above and to have resistances from below as well. I think that if a leader remembers that what they're trying to do is to change the culture and fix a problem in the culture, that they're not trying to fix people, but actually trying to fix a manifestation of a structural problem that manifests itself in the institution, that probably mirrors the society this institution is in, then I think that helps to overcome the resistance, seeing that resistance in the bigger picture. I think a second thing that leaders need to be aware of is that they must pay attention to the informal processes and interactions of a university or an institution, which I call the secret life of the institution. We all know about the rules. Everybody knows that the rules are there. Everybody also knows that the rules are either broken or people find ways around the rules. And it's understanding that secret life of the internal ways in which the formal rules get interpreted, I think, that is really, really important for leaders. Because it's very easy to say, well, we have something in our strategic plan on equality, diversity and inclusion. We have a KPI to meet it. Let's go and meet it. There are the formal rules and the formal parameters. But what do you do when people in that organisation pay lip service to it and do everything to try and undermine meeting that KPI? This is where knowing how the informal interactions and processes and the thinking around what the secret life is around this issue matters. Then leaders can find ways to counter or to mitigate the effects of these informal processes. And the best way, I think, of doing that is to be utterly and completely transparent and to insist on transparency from others as well. because once something is in the open and in the light of day, there's no closing back over it. And the issue has to be dealt with. But when things are kept quiet, when rules are bent and nothing is said, that's where the EDI change agenda can be subverted and undermined, and leaders have to be aware of that.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. I'm so interested in what you said there about the secret life of organisations, because it actually reminds me of a talk that I was at just this week in TU Dublin regarding well-being. And as we know, inclusion is a core aspect of well-being. And it looked at a piece of research that one of our colleagues, Aideen Ryan, is working on around well-being washing, in terms of the difference there between what our leaders are saying, but what staff are experiencing then on the ground. So thank you so much for answering those questions. Even though you and I have worked quite closely together on various different projects, we don't often get the time to step out and really discuss some of these issues. So it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much. Any final remarks or key points you'd like to summarise for our listeners?
Thanks very much, Shauna. I think that if a leader is embarking on this change agenda, as well as having the personal qualities and the personal commitment to the area, I think the leader has to choose very wisely the person for the task of actually leading the change on a day-to-day basis. Because the leader in an organisation can't necessarily do that, but needs the support of a team or groups of individuals through the university that can actually lead to that change and that are committed to it. So I think this speaks to the importance of building coalitions of the willing and supporting those coalitions appropriately, recognising the work that they do and giving visibility, elevating that work as much as possible. Leaders have great opportunities to speak, and when they speak, they're listened to. So I think leaders should take the opportunity in speaking to whatever audience and in whatever context to bring in the inclusion agenda into that space. And I think that is a very powerful affirmation for the individuals that are doing the work on the ground. But it is also, again, setting the tone of the culture. And I think that's one area that leaders may need to pay attention to, because we don't often hear them speak in that way, even though there is great work going on and by so many organisations and groups in this area. So giving the role to someone or to groups that can inhabit that role with conviction, and then supporting them in elevating the work, I think are key things that I would leave people with to think about. Thank you so much.
On a closing note then, would you have any reading recommendations for the listeners interested in exploring these discussions further?
Well, there's a huge amount of literature out there around leading change, around equality, diversity and inclusion now. But I would briefly like to recommend 3 particular and very different pieces of reading. One of them is easily found online, and it is a short blog by a man called Alex Draper, published in 2024. A very short blog. And I chose it because it's written by a man. Because often people think that equality is women's work. In fact, it's not. It's a whole organisation work. He has written a blog called Equity in Leadership, Fostering Fairness and Inclusion, and that's available online. It's just a matter of Googling the title. From an academic point of view, I think it's very interesting to look at women's role as leaders, because women often find themselves caught between the social expectations around being a woman and the social expectations around being a leader. There's a very interesting study on this by 2 Canadian scholars, Alison Byrne and Ingrid Chadwick, and it's called How Women Leaders' Identities Coexist Through Public and Private Identity Endorsements. Again, this is a very recent publication in 2024 in the Journal of Leadership and Organisational Studies. So that's the second reading. And the third reading I would suggest is the European Commission's She Figures Policy Report. Many of the listeners to this podcast will be familiar with the European Commission's publication of the She Figures reports, which is a data report on where women and men are in higher education, especially in the sciences, but not exclusively. So broadly in higher education across the European Union. That's a triennial report, and in 2024, they are accompanying the data with a very substantial policy report, which has 6 or 7 articles on different aspects of fostering equality and inclusion across universities in the European Union. So now that that's available, it's a great repository of information and ideas for anybody, for any of our listeners.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yvonne. Some really interesting recommendations there and a very interesting discussion. So thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic. And thank you for having me interview you. And I hope that you all enjoyed it. And thank you, Sarah, as well. It's been great to have the chat, and you are full of experience in this area as well. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Yvonne and Shauna, for this very interesting conversation about inclusive leadership and drawing on your own experiences. If you want more information about the NEXUS project and other podcasts, please visit our project website at nexusproject.info. Thank you very much.